Now, as the trade war rages on, we're beginning to see pieces of the economic puzzle falling into place. GDP had its worst quarter since 22, shrinking 0.3 in the first quarter of the year. Another piece of the jigsaw, job growth slowed down in April but remains strong. US manufacturing contracted for the second month in a row. The markets have been on a roller coaster with major averages mostly recovering from the shock. And finally, there's trade. US imports surged, obviously, as people tried to beat the tariffs that are now in place on China. Shipping volumes are now down sharply, around 35% at the port of LA. Ryan Petersen is the CEO of the supply chain management Flexport. Well, we've talked before, we'll talk again, we'll keep talking. Contrast mean the environment now versus, say, 2 or 3 weeks ago, or just before the tariffs came in. Have things got quiet?
Well, hey, thanks for having me back on. It's pretty, not that much has changed. I think people are still in a moment sitting here waiting for something to change, sitting here waiting patiently and excitedly. Maybe that's the wrong word. No one's that excited. People are kind of horrified by what's happening in their business. We see a 60% decline in ocean freight coming from China to the US since April 9th, since the tariffs kicked in. So 60% is just a massive drop in the amount of volume coming to the country from one of our biggest trading partners. That's disproportionately affecting small business who are, at some point you don't have any product left to sell and you fail. Putting pause on a business is not going to work.
As those ships, they leave China, as they come across the ocean, you then have to deal with, of course, you now at least know the tariffs, you know the harmonized details in terms of the tables and the tariffs. It's really just a question of paying the money. Are your clients writing large checks to the US Treasury for tariffs?
Yeah, absolutely. So the tariffs took place, they started on April 9th, but that was based on the departure date of the ship. It takes about 2 weeks to cross the ocean. So we really saw last week was the first week of these higher duties actually getting paid to the government. There's a lot of scramble right now to move cargo into what's called a bonded warehouse, which lets you avoid paying duties until it leaves the warehouse. So that's a big thing that's happening is people, if you think the duties are going to come down on China, which most people, including the president, have said they will, then if you don't need the inventory immediately, it's a good idea to move it into a warehouse, a bonded warehouse that lets you avoid paying those duties until the rates come down.
Hang on. So, but I thought the rate was set when the thing ships. You're saying it can change if it's in a bonded warehouse and the tariff comes down?
Yeah, if you have a bonded warehouse, then it's the duty that you pay is based on the rate that when effective on that day when it leaves the warehouse, rather than when it entered the country. So that's one strategy. It doesn't really work because it'll work for a period of time, but at the end of the day, you bought these goods because you want to sell them. So why leave them in storage?
What are you seeing ASPAC, Asia Pacific, ex-China? Are you seeing fall off in volumes from ASEAN and other parts of Southeast Asia?
No, in fact, we're seeing growth from every other place in the world except for China. Well, on average, you see about a 5% increase in volumes from rest of world into the United States. And that's a Flexport statistic, so I don't know what the whole market looks like. We're about 1% of the market, but it's probably relevant. It's a statistically valid sample. So you are seeing growth out of Vietnam especially, but rest of world overall, people are shipping more to the U.S. Companies are shifting their production to other factories besides their Chinese ones.
This is interesting because that suggests, obviously people are trying to substitute supply chains with other countries. And of course, a 10% tariff from most of these other countries is clearly better than a 145. But it does suggest that global trade can live harmonized, if you will, at a 10% global tariff.
That's our view. Is 10% is pretty. People can absorb it. The currencies may go down for those countries. They'll strike deals with those factories to get better pricing, and they'll be able to pass it through to consumers in slightly higher prices, and life will go on. But 145 is really a decoupling rate with China. And by the way, a 5% increase on rest of world and a 60% decline on China, it means that it's about the way that these volumes work out, it's about a 15% decline in overall volume entering the country. So you are talking about extreme recession scenario if you decrease trade by 15% overnight.
Ryan, I'm so grateful we were able to talk to you tonight, because I'm getting real insight into what's happening, if you will, as we used to say, at the factory gate and at the port door. Thank you, sir. We'll talk more.